When I was 13, I started my menstrual cycle, and I was going through a pack of pads in a day.
Heavy menstrual cycles that lasted, you know, 10, 14 days of just hemorrhaging severely.
I've always had low iron levels. It was always horrible.
You assume that what's happening to you is normal.
And I wasn't too sure if it was normal or not, just because it was my first time ever having a period.
Growing up, like, getting hurt, having prolonged bleeding times, bruises all over me, and pain all the time was a part of my life. And that's how I just grew up.
Before diagnosis, in the beginning, I would say it was frustrating, but then it was kind of just like, this is my normal.
For so many women and girls living with bleeding disorders, symptoms get minimized, normalized, or completely dismissed.
And for years, the conversation around bleeding disorders centered almost entirely around men and boys. But women have always been here. They have always had symptoms, and they've always deserved care. They just never had the diagnosis. Welcome to a new chapter of The Flow with BloodStream Media.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Board, co-host of the BloodStream podcast. I'm here with Kay Vermeil. And before we jump in, we want to acknowledge and celebrate the work of our previous hosts, Jessica Richmond and Sarah Watson, who have done a phenomenal job with the Flow podcast. And while Flow is entering a new chapter here at BloodStream Media, we're excited to share that Jay Rich and Sarah will be continuing their work speaking on extreme menstrual bleeding and, of course, straight talk about extreme periods. Both of them have helped shape Flow into a space where these conversations can happen honestly and openly, and we're excited to see what they're going to do next. So we'll keep you updated on where you can follow them.
And we are honored to continue the conversation with all of you as The Flow with BloodStream.
Today's episode, it's not just a heavy period. For too long, women and girls with bleeding disorders have been told they're just carriers. But the truth is women can experience real bleeding symptoms too, and their stories deserve to be heard. That's the idea behind Because She Matters, a campaign from Novo Nordisk. It highlights the experiences of women living with hemophilia and other bleeding disorders, helping raise awareness of symptoms that are often overlooked or misunderstood. On the site, you'll see real stories from women who went years without answers, learn about signs like heavy or prolonged periods, frequent bruising, or unexplained bleeding, and find guidance on how to start conversations with your healthcare provider. Because recognizing the signs is the first step towards getting the care you deserve. Visit womenwithhemophilia.com. That's womenwithhemophilia.com, or click the link in the show notes. Because when it comes to bleeding disorders, women's health matters. Women's voices matter. Because she matters. Learn more and explore the resources at womenwithhemophilia.com.
One of the people helping us unpack the idea it's not just a heavy period is Dr. Jen Davila, a hematologist who works closely with women and girls experiencing heavy bleeding symptoms.
Do you have clots? Do you have to get up at night? Do you have to do all these different things? Then, you say, well, that is what heavy menses is. To them, it's like, oh, but it's always been like that. And my mom always has it like that. And let's be honest, it's not like women are going out to cocktails and talking about their periods. No one's sharing this information. So you assume that what's happening to you is normal, And I think once you start asking those questions is when they realize, oh, I guess that is a problem, which is something they may not even have realized before.
You'll also hear from Brittany, a mom living with hemophilia, whose symptoms were dismissed for years before she officially was diagnosed and treated herself.
Honestly, in the beginning, I don't think I really ever thought, I knew I was a carrier. I knew I was having symptoms, but I never really thought too much more about it, needing a diagnosis for myself, needing treatment for myself, because it wasn't something that happened ever, I never heard of women who were hemophiliacs, who got treatment, who had diagnosis other than being a carrier, or even a little bit more than that, being considered a symptomatic carrier.
It's their normal. But once you intervene, they realize, oh my God, I'm supposed to have this much energy?
Naomi was diagnosed young, but like many women with hemophilia, getting people to believe her symptoms was a totally different story.
It affected my mood, and I was feeling really down, tired. with low energy really, and that's when we kind of figured like something is going on and we have to talk to a doctor about it.
When I was a teenager, I suffered from severe rectal bleeding, and it was scary, for me and my mom. My mom's a nurse, so I went through tons of testing, multiple colonoscopies as a young girl, and just knew that like it wasn't right, but never had any answers for it.
Living with anemia, which is basically, you're bleeding so much, your body is not able to keep up with producing what you're losing or making up those red blood cells. And there's fatigue, there's issues with concentration, quality of life is less.
It was embarrassing, as a teenager, having your periods embarrassing, anything. So if, dealing with something along the same lines.
There's the physical side of this, but there's also everything it steals from you emotionally.
Confidence, energy, social life, the feeling that your body is working with you instead of against you.
And Nadini brings another important perspective, navigating bleeding disorders across cultures, countries, and generations.
In India, we don't even talk about it at all. And so it was kind of hard to talk about, even with the doctors, to tell them what exactly is going on. But the one thing I've learned through this whole thing is if you don't talk, nobody else is going to know.
I think that culture, where you come from, what your background is, what your beliefs are, what your religion is, all those things are going to influence how quickly you seek medical attention.
I was dismissing myself. I'm not going to need anything. I don't need any of this. Plus, it's also like you're coming to a new country. You don't want to come with baggage, or you don't want to say that something is not right with me. So that's a big part of Indian culture, like oh, I'm perfect. So, which is nobody wants to be imperfect.
There's a level of just fear because I don't want to be labeled as somebody who is not quote unquote perfect or healthy. Therefore, I don't want my children to be diagnosed, right? My whole family has this. We all know we have this. I don't have to bring them to medical attention. And usually when those children do show up, they've had years of bleeding. They're horribly anemic. So those are the sort of the things that I've seen. I've also seen sometimes parents are aware that if their young daughter has heavy bleeding, that they may have to go on hormonal contraception to help the bleeding, not necessarily for contraception, just to help control the heavy menses. And I think there's still, especially depending on what culture you come from, there's this negative cloud over hormonal therapy. Tylenol can be used for fever and for headache. Hormonal medication could be used for heavy menses or for contraception. So we're using it for this indication and not the other one.
All the doctors wanted to help me for the cycles, but somehow nothing worked for me. So we tried, I think 4 or 5 options, but it just ended up in prolonging it. Like, instead of 4 heavy days, I would have like 12 light days. And I'm like, I don't know if I want this. Or sometimes it would be like, oh, this till it adjusts, you may have spotting for a while. So the for a while was like 30 to 45 days. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with this. I would rather have the 4 days and get it over with. Between trying the products and everything, I was freed of the flow.
Sometimes I tell the parents, let's just do this for 6 months, right? Let's let that hemoglobin come up. Let's see how her quality of life improves, because I've had kids who have just sobbed in front of me and said, I just want to be able to go to the pool, right? I just want to wear a bathing suit.
It was tough, going swimming. I lived in Florida, so everybody was always going to the beach and everything. And yeah, it definitely, it was something that I was always aware of.
That line about just wanting to go to the pool, it says so much.
Because people hear heavy periods and think inconvenience. But for a lot of women, it changes how they move through the world.
So initially I was just called a carrier of the hemophilia gene. And it just sparked so many questions, like how could I just be a carrier of this gene when I'm presenting issues for myself, heavy menstrual cycles that lasted, 10, 14 days of just hemorrhaging severely, the rectal bleeding.
When I had gotten diagnosed, they were just saying that I was a carrier. and that was it. When I started getting the bruising and then the injuries that weren't healing, they were like, okay, then she's a symptomatic carrier. And that was it. They were like, you don't have hemophilia, you're a symptomatic carrier.
At the age of 3, I was diagnosed with von Willebrand. So I lived with that till the 26, till the knee episode. 26, I got the diagnosis of moderately severe hemophilia. And then I come to the US, then I get the diagnosis of symptomatic carrier, and then I don't do much. I came into the US with the diagnosis. So what's funny is I came here with the diagnosis of a hemophilia, and then I was labeled as a symptomatic carrier when I came here.
We're trying to move away from that symptomatic carrier. You're not a carrier, you have hemophilia, right? It's sort of like a little annoying. Just because I think we're trying to train, like, my team to, we don't say symptomatic carrier, we don't say carrier, we say this is a person with hemophilia.
They would tell me that every single time. It was almost like they would correct me. Like, as soon as I would say hemophilia, they're like, no, you're a carrier. That was how they would say it every time. So that's kind of how I viewed it for the longest time.
Because I think sometimes when we use the word carrier, it sort of minimizes the disease and minimizes the person's symptoms, not just to the medical team, but to the patient themselves.
I turned 17 is when I started to be more active with working out. Obviously, my body was changing as well. I've noticed a difference, and I went in there and I told them, I was like, I have bleeds. And my dad was like, they are bleeds because I have bleeds myself. I looked at that and that is a bleed. And that's when they were like, no, she's a carrier. That can't happen to her. She cannot have factor. She doesn't need it. And then from there is when we started that process of proving it.
I got a referral to an oncology office, and I spoke to the oncologist there, and he mentioned, I told him my levels, my fluctuations, everything like that. And he was like, well, why doesn't your chart say mild hemophiliac? And I was like, I don't know. And he goes, well, it's going to now. And so it was a relief. Like, I was shocked. I was happy that finally my medical records were going to state that I was a mild hemophiliac. And I knew at that point, I thought at that point, it would be easier for me to get treatment if needed. I was wrong, even having that diagnosis.
And then from there, they were like, okay, she has hemophilia. But then it was like, to me, it was like, nothing has changed. It's just, they changed it to, instead of being a carrier, you have hemophilia. But nothing changed there.
That's the part that's hard to sit with.
The diagnosis changed, but for the longest time, the care didn't.
As I got older and asked for factor, it was a bit of a struggle. It took me about like a year to really get them to give me my factor. I had to prove myself. I had to send them pictures because they were often like, you know what, that can't happen with women. But I mean, we could see it.
Keep documentation. That's the only way I have found that people, believe in you. And it's sad that we have to prove what we are going through. But you would be surprised when you start writing down about what you are going through. You yourself would be surprised, like, oh my God, all this happened to me in those 10 days. That's not normal. And if I'm shocked, I'm sure somebody else listening to it is going to be shocked. So try it for 10 days, like, note it down and see what you read it all together.
The way that I documented it was by writing in a notebook. So I asked my dad, I was like, how do I prove that to him? He was like, you know what, you're gonna have to write everything down. If you have a bleed, write exactly the day, what time, how you were feeling, and then I took pictures. So I just kept doing that. I was basically logging it. And on my periods too, I would just write down how many pads I was going through and stuff like that. Once I took it in, I showed her the notebook, then I showed her all the pictures. I mean, there's no denying it there. You have the proof. From there, she was like, okay, you know what? Let's give you the factor and see how that works for you.
I think that we need to realize that when it comes to hemophilia, those people that we name carriers actually are symptomatic, and they also manifest the disease on lab work. So once you start manifesting a disorder, you're not a carrier, you have the disease. So we really have to just totally move away from that.
I was showing my dad like the big bruises that I would get, the swelling. I was working out. I was doing jujitsu too, so it really just like it affected me a lot. And it was almost like they were trying to call me a liar in a way. So it did really make me feel bad. But with proof, I was finally able to get my factor, but I have to prove it. And it's different with men. I guess they go in and they're like, okay, let's give you your factor.
I've said very straight up to my doctors, like, if I brought my son in and he told you that he was hemorrhaging for 10 days, what would you do for him? And their answer is give him factor. And so why aren't we doing that for me? Why isn't it the same? Why isn't that the norm for a female who's having bleeding, who has joints that are swelling and, arthritis as a 30-year-old and all these things that are going on? Why are we not doing the same for them?
The first impact about other women's stories was at a women's conference where they said, they talked about the symptoms they have, and it was exactly like what I was going through. And they said they just had the carrier's label, and the doctors had dismissed their case as if, they're treating their baby who is a hemophiliac, but for them, the mom is invisible. And I'll never forget that time when she said, they treat my son, but I'm invisible to them. And I'm like, why is this happening? Like, what should be done? What can be done to change this? And that's how I got into the whole advocacy for women thing.
The idea of invisibility comes up again and again in these stories.
And what's powerful is hearing these women refuse to stay invisible anymore.
It took a lot of advocating for myself, and when I had showed her all the proof, my dad was even in there with me telling her everything. And when she was finally like, okay, we'll try it, I was just like, really? Like, it was just kind of like, are you sure? Like, we're good. And then I looked at my dad and I was like, and he was like, I think they're gonna give it to you. And I was like, okay. So I got my first box of factor, and then when I got my first box of factor, I was really happy because I was like, okay, I'm able to infuse myself. It helps me so much. Like, I definitely feel that difference when I use my factor. I told my dad, I was like, it almost feels like I'm just like giving this little boost. I don't know how to explain it, because like I'll have like an injury or something, or I just get my period and I'm bleeding heavily. Once I finally infuse, I feel a lot better, and then I notice the difference right away. The swelling starts to kind of go down. The pain, I feel like it helps my pain. It could be me just like telling myself it helps with the pain, but it does. Um, my bleeding is not as heavy anymore, so I don't go through a pack of pads. I still have like a box there that I haven't opened, and I don't even remember when I bought it. So that's how I know. Because before it was just one of those things like, Mom, I have to go to the store to buy pads. Mom, I have to go again. She's like, again? And they're expensive. So I definitely noticed the difference with the factor, and it really helps my joints and everything. So I love it.
And over the years, I learned that, well, if he gets a treatment for what happened to him, I am not getting treatment for myself. So that's how the journey started. It was a slow process, but I started on demand. Then I went 2 times prophy, only if I was going for PT. That changed to 2 times because, PT was helping, but then it was also causing bleeding. And then you get overconfident thinking, oh, I'm doing PT, I'm taking factor, maybe I can climb this mountain. It's like, lots of ups and downs. And the HTC finally realized, along with me, that, I do need prophylaxis. So I started with twice a week, then went to 3 times a week. There was a time when I was infusing every day because Monday, Wednesday, Friday, if you have a bleed on Tuesday, you're infusing pretty much all the week. So, and now it's been regular, like prophylaxis for about, I want to say 12 to 13 years probably. So just to prevent the damage from getting worse.
So, seeing the changes in my body since I have started Factor, I wish that I never thought those things were normal. My menstrual cycle went from, like 10 to 14 days to 3 days. And it's normal, it's regular. I do still tend to bleed with ovulation somewhat, but it's not as bad. It just depends on when my prophy day falls and when that falls. But if I do an infusion on the first day of my menstrual cycle, then everything is it's easy, you know. I'm not dealing with the severe hemorrhaging. I'm not dealing with the severe fatigue. Um, it has helped my joint swelling.
I think that if I would have gotten the correct diagnosis at a young age, my life would have been completely different. I think that the injuries that I have now that haven't healed, I don't think I would have had them as bad as I do now, because it would have helped me heal a lot faster. I wouldn't have to be spending that much. The money that I spent on pads is insane. I think I wouldn't have to have dealt with so much if I would have got the proper diagnosis. Um, but then again, I always tell myself everything happens for a reason. And I think that this was a learning lesson for me. It taught me what it is to be an advocate, especially for women.
I always thought these things were normal and they weren't. And I hear that a lot within the community, that this is just, like I said, this is just my normal. This is what I've always dealt with. And to know now that I didn't have to deal with that my whole life, I wish that there was more knowledge of treating women.
That's what makes this conversation so important.
Because every single one of these women knew something was wrong long before the medical system listened to them.
I think that in the bleeding disorder community, for so many decades, we focus so much on the boys that bleed, and we've sort of just ignored the women. We're just like, oh well, periods are heavy. That's just what it is. You know what I mean? And I think we have to make a conscious decision to move away from that. And it's not just educating the patients, but it's also educating the doctors, and having them prioritize that, because I don't think that we do a lot of the time. I think the culture is changing. I do see that. I think a lot more attention is being placed on how to manage persons that menstruate with bleeding disorders and bringing them to medical attention to diagnose them. But I think a lot of work needs to be done.
And for everybody in the community, I would say, please keep believing the woman, keep listening to them, and please give them a chance so they can have access to the care that they need and deserve.
Learning self-advocacy it's difficult, especially as a mom, because like I said, in the early years, even knowing that I had the gene, I just didn't fight for myself. I was in a process of fighting for my kids. And if I would have started fighting for myself earlier, I probably wouldn't be as bad off with my joints right now. But it really took getting to the point where I was in so much physical pain to say, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, I have 3 little boys who depend on me. I want to be able to jump on the trampoline with them. I want to be able to run around and chase them. And I'm so limited. And I think that's really what sparked the self-advocacy was, you know, just wanting better for myself and for my kids and wanting to be there for them more. You definitely need to fight. And having the community of women who are all basically going through the same thing right now, it really does, it sparks something inside to want to see not only myself get better, but all these ladies who are dealing with these symptoms, who have dealt with these things their entire life, to help them advocate for themselves, to teach them that, you know, you can say no, you can fire your doctor, you can find someone new, and it doesn't have to stop. You can continue to do that for yourself.
I just feel that for women, they do need a voice. And now we even have men advocating for women, which I think is beautiful. So I don't really see it as a bad thing, just because I know that I've learned a lot through the entire process. I'm able to share my story with people, and I love listening to other people's stories. And I know that I have some friends that are a lot older. They're like in their 20s, 30s, and they still don't even have the proper diagnosis. So I'm just like, it's crazy. And I'm glad that at least I hope that I can make a change and get people to want to advocate.
For years, so many women with bleeding disorders were taught to minimize what they were experiencing.
To push through it, to normalize it, to explain it away.
But these stories remind us what happens when women are finally listened to.
When they're diagnosed, when they get treatment, when they're believed.
And maybe the most important thing of this is that none of these women were overreacting.
They were bleeding. They were hurting.
And they deserved care.
Thanks for joining us for this new chapter of The Flow with BloodStream.
We'll see you next time. And remember, women's voices matter because she matters. Learn more and explore the resources at womenwithhemophilia.com.